Hello, and welcome to the Trepid Technologies Security Plus course. My name is Johnny Bandon, and I will be your instructor for this video series. In this video, we will be going over domain 1.3 application attacks. So let's get started. The first attack we will discuss is a privilege escalation attack. After reconnaissance and establishing a foothold in the network, an attacker's next step is to gain some privilege. A privilege escalation attack exploits a vulnerability in the network or a system to route a regular user to gain root or privilege level access. And once that attacker gains root or administrative privileges, the attacker will have free reign to install malicious payloads or even the ability to then pivot on the network. So imagine a threat actor getting root privileges on your web server. They'll be able to do anything they want. If that web server sits in your enterprise and that same root user can be used on different servers, they can now pivot from this web server over to your database servers or even your domain services server. So privilege escalation attack is not something you want happening in your network, and you want to make sure that your privileged users and administrative accounts are locked down. Next, we're going to talk about a cross-site scripting attack. A cross-site scripting attack is a web-based attack that's going to exploit the front end of a website. So websites will use HTML to display web pages. Anyone that had a MySpace page knows this, right? And attackers definitely know this. And with a cross-site scripting attack, they aim to exploit the HTML language to inject vulnerabilities or malicious payloads into the site. An example of this is exploiting the script brackets in HTML. So if you're not a programmer or coder, that's okay. You don't have to be for the Security Plus exam. But in the front end of a website, we have these script brackets. And in these script brackets will be links, static or dynamic links to, let's say, like JavaScript, right? And now even Python, but let's just keep it simple. So we'll just type in JavaScript, and this will run something that interacts with maybe the back end of that website, right? And then we end it with a slash, right, script. So we know we can do that on HTML. We can have these script brackets. So now let's imagine a login page on a website. So a login page will have input fields for you to put your username or password. If you are free to put anything you want in those input fields, you could input malicious codes into those fields using the script bracket. And if you're able to do that, the website will process that malicious script. So a way to prevent this, you can implement something we like to call input validation. Input validation. This will only allow certain characters in your input fields. Like, let's say, for example, in the username field, you only allow lowercase a through z, capital A through z, and 0 through 9. And you can do that with your password fields with the exception of some special characters. And when you do that on your website or in the code, right, you put input validation, an attacker won't be allowed to use those script brackets. A SQL injection attack is another web-based attack. With a SQL injection, your aim is actually the back end, whereas cross-site scripting will exploit the front-end HTML language. A SQL injection attack exploits the back-end database language, or the structured query language is what that stands for. So in this attack, a malicious threat actor will input SQL code onto that input field of your website in an attempt to elicit sensitive information from the website's database, install malicious code that could break the database, or to manipulate information in that database. Let's say making a product that is $100 equal to $0. Same premise as a cross-site scripting attack, but instead of you manipulating the front end, now you're manipulating the back end, right? Where the database server lives. And again, the way to prevent a SQL injection attack is to implement input validation. And again, we don't have to be programmers in the Security Plus exam. We just got to know what these attacks, what their aim is, right? What this attack is doing. So we don't need you to know how to code in SQL, but we do need to know that there is something called a SQL injection attack that will exploit our databases. And then we have a memory leak. A memory leak attack will cause performance issues in your system. When a memory block should be released back to the system, like let's say you open up a Chrome tab, you exit off it, that memory block should be given back to the system. Well, when that fails, that is called a memory leak. This will lead to poor performance and potentially crashes your system. An integer overflow attack is pretty simple in nature. An integer overflow attack will exploit the error handling of your application, your website, or your program. So if a program does not have proper error handling, if I input, let's say, like a -1 into an input field that wants a 0 through 99, that could potentially crash that program or send back an error that stops the logical flow of that program. So a way to prevent an integer overflow attack is to put error handling into the code, that source code. Maybe that's a try and accept statement, right? And Python, the only language I kind of know. But there's different ways you can do error handling in your websites or your applications. And then we have a directory traversal. A directory traversal attack will attempt to circumvent your website's file/folder structure. In this attack, a malicious threat actor will try to navigate to sensitive files or directories from the front end of your website. An example of this is a threat actor typing the directory path to the Etsy shadow file/directory to view the system's passwords, and they'll type that into the URL bar. So you see here, we got the dots indicating a directory and the forward slashes, and they attempt to go to the Etsy password, which shows the users, the Etsy shadow file directory, which shows the passwords. And they try to do this from the front end of your website. So if that attacker knows you're using Linux and you have an Apache and a Nginx running, they may try to do a directory traversal attack in the actual URL bar. So with someone with knowledge of the file system, they can try this directory traversal attack, right? So a good way to prevent this is actually not allowing characters like this into the URL field, right? So not allowing any traversals built into the code of your website. A buffer overflow attack is another memory attack that attempts to actually exhaust the system memory, essentially performing a kind of denial of service attack, but this time on the attackers, they're attacking the system's computing resources. So when a buffer overflow attack is successful, all the information that's running or data being processed that's by the memory could become corrupted. And then we have a race condition, which is, I find, always the hardest to explain to my students. Let's go ahead and give it a try, right? So what a race condition is timing of code that gets executed out of order. And it messes with the threading or manipulates the threading of CPUs, right? So let's go over a famous example of a race condition that happened to Starbucks back in 2015 with gift cards and their gift card values on the internet. So a researcher by the name Igor Hamakov proved a race condition is possible. What he did was he initiated 2 identical web transfers at once and was able to trick the system in recording them both. So what he did is he went to Starbucks website, starbucks.com, and he had 2 gift cards of $5 values. Well, when you have 2 gift cards, you may want to transfer that value into one, right? Leading you to a $10 gift card. What he did is executed this at the same time and manipulated these values into giving him a $15 gift card and one blank one, but he only had 10 actual dollars worth of value. So he proved that the timing and the execution at which you do data transfers matters, and was able to give himself $15 when he only started with $10. So again, this is what a race condition is. You see here it's called a time of check, time of use, essentially meaning that timing is very important when you're executing data in your environments and on your systems. And then now let's go over input validation. So we've talked about it as a way to prevent SQL injection attacks, cross-site scripting attacks. But what is it? Essentially, all it is built into your code or your program, you're only going to allow certain parameters and characters into your input fields. Like we previously discussed on the cross-site scripting slide. So you're only allowing 0 through 9, lowercase a through z, or capital A through z, right? And that is input validation. So if any character outside of this is used in that input field, your website won't process it or the code won't execute it. And the last thing we're going to talk about is a replay attack. A replay attack will capture traffic sent from client to server and will take that captured data to replay an authenticated session. This can also be referred to as a man-in-the-middle attack. But a replay attack is more specific to trying to replicate that authenticated session. So let's refer to this exhibit, right? So we have this unsuspecting user, which creates a session to a web server and logs in, let's say to his bank. He goes to usaa.com. That attacker is going to capture that session or that data, maybe using a program like Wireshark, which we'll discuss later in the series. The attacker is going to resend that captured data and attempts to replay it back to that web server. So now that attacker can have that authenticated session to the web server. And now he can steal information, cause havoc on that person's bank, transfer money, whatever the case may be, right? But that is essentially what a replay attack is. An attacker capturing that raw data, sending it to a server in hopes of using that data to replay an authenticated session. All right. That is it for Domain 1.3, different types of attacks. Thank you for viewing, and stay tuned for our next video covering Domain 1.4 network attacks. And also be on the lookout for our bonus videos that we'll be creating, where we're going to deep dive into some of these attacks like the race condition, go over that a little bit more, try to show you what a cross-site scripting attack looks like or famous examples. This will be part of our bonus section of our Sec Plus course. I call them bonus because you don't need to deep dive into a lot of these to be successful on your exam. But if you're curious, we'll be putting these videos out as we get time. Thank you for viewing.